The wind tore across the frozen peaks of Eldravar, carrying with it a sharp, bitter cold that gnawed at the bones. Snow drifted in restless patterns, hiding jagged rocks and frozen crevices beneath its white cloak. In the midst of this desolation, Lyra stumbled, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear. Her hands were raw, her fingers cracked from the relentless cold, and her breaths came in ragged puffs that quickly vanished into the gray sky. She had been exiled, cast out by her own clan for a mistake she did not fully understand, a mistake that had cost the life of the chieftain's heir. Their voices still echoed in her mind, harsh, accusing, final. "You are cursed. You bring death where you go. Leave and never return." Lyra had left without looking back. She had no plan, no companions, and no hope that anyone would search for her. Yet even as the snow bit into her cheeks, she felt an instinct to survive that burned hotter than the cold. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the whiteness, something small and vulnerable called to her, a tiny heartbeat she could feel more than see. Moving cautiously, she spotted it, a small shivering bundle tucked beneath a crumbling rock. A pup, its fur frosted with ice, its eyes wide with fear. Its whines were faint, pitiful, and yet they stirred something in Lyra, a protective spark she did not know she had. She knelt, brushing the snow from its trembling body. "You poor thing," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You've been left all alone, just like me." The pup nuzzled into her hands, curling tightly against the warmth of her body. For the first time since her exile, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she wasn't entirely alone. Perhaps she could survive if only for this little creature. Night fell with a sudden cruelty, wrapping the mountains in a cold so deep it seemed to seep into her very soul. Lyra built a small shelter against the wind, a fragile barrier of rocks and fallen branches, and wrapped the pup in her tattered cloak. As the fire she managed to ignite flickered, casting shadows across her face, she allowed herself a moment of rest. But sleep brought only dreams, and in them, a dark, commanding presence hovered over her. Eyes like polished obsidian watched her, unyielding and merciless. The pup whimpered in its sleep, sensing something Lyra could not yet name. She awoke with a start, heart hammering, and realized the howl she had been hearing in her dreams was real. A long, haunting sound carried through the mountains, a sound that froze her blood. Wolves, she thought. Predators drawn by the scent of warmth, of life. She clutched the pup closer, trying to ignore the fear coiling in her stomach. But there was something different about this sound, something ancient, powerful, and commanding. For hours she lay awake, listening as the howls circled, coming closer and then fading. She knew instinctively that she could not hide forever. She had no weapons, no allies, and no knowledge of these mountains beyond survival instincts. And yet an unshakable resolve took root in her heart. She would survive. She had to. Dawn came slowly, pale and cold. The snow glinted like fractured glass under the first weak rays of sunlight. Lyra rose stiff and aching and scanned the horizon. Her eyes caught movement, something massive moving with purpose and authority. A figure, taller than any man she had ever seen, cloaked in dark furs and radiating an aura that commanded the very air around him. The pup stirred in her arms, suddenly alert, its small body tense. It whined and nuzzled against her as if warning her. And then the figure stopped, lifting his head, and Lyra felt her breath catch. The Alpha King. She had heard the legends whispered in hushed tones, even before her exile. Tales of a ruler feared across the lands, a man whose power over wolves and beasts was unmatched, whose wrath was swift and merciless. Few had seen him and lived to tell the tale. And yet here he stood in the raw wilderness watching her, fear twisted in her chest, sharp and bitter. She wanted to run, to vanish into the snow, but her legs refused. The pup, sensing something she could not understand, crawled against her, its small body trembling. The Alpha King's eyes, dark as midnight and impossibly sharp, seemed to see into her very soul. "You are alone," he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying over the snow and wind. "And yet you protect what should not have survived." Lyra swallowed hard. She could not speak. She only hugged the pup tighter, her heart pounding against her ribs. "You have courage," he continued, "and recklessness. Both will either save you or destroy you." The Alpha King stepped closer, each movement deliberate, almost predatory. Lyra's instinct screamed for her to run, but something in the way he observed the pup with a tenderness that contradicted his fearsome reputation made her hesitate. "Who are you?" She managed, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I am Raylith," he replied, his gaze still fixed on the pup. "And you are in the mountains of my kingdom now. Anyone who harms you or that pup will answer to me." Lyra's chest tightened. Claiming her in this way, by authority, by fear, was infuriating. And yet, the relief that coursed through her could not be denied. She was exhausted, alone, defenseless, and he had chosen to protect her. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "I can survive on my own." He looked at her then, the shadows of the mountains framing his imposing figure. There was something in his gaze, something that went beyond judgment or command, an unreadable depth of feeling that unsettled her. "You will survive," he said simply, "but not alone, not anymore." The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of snow and frost, and Lyra realized she had taken her first breath in hours without shaking. The pup snuggled into her chest, its warmth a small comfort against the cold. Raylith, the Alpha King, turned and gestured. "Come, you will not last long out here alone. Follow me, and I will ensure you are safe, for now." Lyra hesitated, a mixture of fear and reluctant trust battling within her. But the mountains had already taught her that survival required difficult choices, and she knew instinctively that refusing him might be more dangerous than anything the wilderness could throw at her. With the pup secured against her chest, she followed. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and the wind whispered through the peaks as if warning of dangers yet to come. Lyra could not yet see the fortress he led her toward, only the shadows of the cliffs and the flickering movement of wolves in the distance. But something in her chest, a fragile, unspoken hope, stirred. As they moved through the mountains, the pup whimpered once, then nestled against her, finally still. Lyra glanced up at Raylith, seeing the faintest shadow of something softer in his expression before it vanished beneath his usual, unyielding exterior. The first night in the mountains had ended, but Lyra sensed that the true challenge had only begun. The wilderness was harsh, but the world she had just entered, the world of the Alpha King, his power, his secrets, was far more dangerous. And somewhere deep in the snowy expanse a howl rose, echoing through the peaks, a reminder that the mountains were alive, and that destiny had begun to stir. "Hook." The howl drew closer, chilling Lyra to her core. The pup stiffened in her arms, ears flat against its tiny head. And Lyra realized that whatever was coming, it was not alone, and it was heading straight for them. The mountains of Eldravar stretched endlessly under a sky that shifted between gray and the faintest blush of dawn. The wind was sharper now, cutting through Lyra's thin cloak as she clutched the pup closer to her chest. Its small heartbeat pulsed against her palm, a fragile rhythm that reminded her she was not entirely alone. She followed Raylith through narrow passes and frozen ridges, each step a careful negotiation with the treacherous terrain. The Alpha King moved ahead with the grace of a predator, his massive form easily traversing paths that would have left her gasping and stumbling. Even as she trudged behind him, Lyra could not ignore the power radiating from him, the same force that had made his legend feared across the lands. The forested slopes gave way to a hidden valley, where the ruins of an ancient fortress rose from the snow like jagged teeth. Its black stone walls were worn but still imposing, a silent testament to centuries of power and protection. Lyra's heart pounded as Raylith led her closer. Every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind a whisper of unseen watchers. "Stay close," Raylith said, his voice low but firm. "The mountains are harsh, but the fortress is harsher." Lyra nodded, her throat tight. She had survived the cold, the snow, and the wild beasts, but the idea of stepping into a place ruled by the Alpha King, a man whose very name inspired fear, filled her with a mixture of awe and dread. As they approached the massive gates, the pup stirred, whimpering softly. Raylith crouched, letting the pup climb to his chest. He held it gently, his massive hands surprisingly careful, and spoke in a tone that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. "You see," he said quietly, "even the fiercest creatures trust me when they have no choice, and yet they follow instinct. You are different." Lyra's fingers tightened around the pup. "I don't trust easily," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Especially not someone like you." Raylith straightened, his dark eyes locking onto hers. There was no anger there, only a steady, piercing assessment, as if he were weighing her worth with a glance. "Then you will learn," he said simply, "because you are in my territory now. And here, trust is optional, but obedience is not. The gates opened with a grinding roar, revealing a courtyard blanketed in snow and shadows. Figures moved along the walls. Wolves, enormous and silent, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Lyra felt the pup stiffen, sensing the presence of creatures that were both beautiful and terrifying. She wanted to step back, to retreat into the cold wilderness that had, in its own cruel way, been simpler. But Raylith's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a reminder that she could not flee. His presence was overwhelming, almost suffocating. Yet beneath the intimidation there was a strange sense of protection. Inside, the fortress was a labyrinth of stone corridors, spiraling staircases and hidden chambers. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting the Alpha King's ancestors. Figures of imposing men and women, some with wolves at their side, others wielding swords that gleamed in candlelight. Lyra realized she had stepped into a world where history, power, and legend were inseparable, a place where survival was measured not by strength alone but by wit, courage, and loyalty. Raylith led her to a small chamber near the fortress's inner courtyard. A fire burned in the hearth, its warmth a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside. Lyra sank to the floor, still holding the pup, letting the first real moment of rest wash over her. The heat seared her frozen skin, but it also made her heart ache with the weight of exhaustion. "You will stay here," Raylith said, his voice calm but commanding. "No one will harm you here. The pup as well. But remember, trust is earned, not given. Do not forget why you were brought here." Lyra looked up, confused and wary. "Brought here? I thought you were protecting me." Raylith's expression softened briefly before hardening again. "I am protecting you. But do not mistake protection for kindness. This fortress is my domain. My rules govern all who enter it, whether by choice or fate." Lyra nodded, though her mind was a whirl of questions. She wanted to ask about the legends, the curse, the power that made him feared. But the weight of the fortress, of his presence, silenced her. Words felt fragile here, meaningless against the immensity of the Alpha King's authority. As the evening deepened, Lyra tended to the pup, brushing snow from its fur and offering it scraps of dried food she had carried from the mountains. She marveled at how quickly it had grown attached to her, how its small trust gave her courage she had not known she possessed. She wondered if Raylith could see that same courage or if he only saw weakness. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside her chamber. Lyra stiffened, clutching the pup. The door creaked open and Raylith's shadow filled the frame. He did not enter, only lingered, watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce through layers of fear and fatigue. "You survived better than I expected," he said. "Perhaps you are stronger than you realize." Lyra bristled, offended yet strangely stirred by his words. "I have to be," she said quietly. "I have no choice." Raylith's lips curved slightly, almost a smile, before vanishing under the stern line of his jaw. "Strength alone will not save you. Courage alone will not save you. You must understand this world, its rules, and the danger it carries." Before she could respond, a sudden howl split the night air. The pup leapt from her lap, ears flat, eyes wide with terror. Lyra's heart raced as she rushed to the window. Outside, the snow swirled in unnatural patterns, as if the wind itself were alive, shaping shadows that moved with intent. Raylith's hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her without touching too firmly. "The mountains are alive," he said, his voice low. "They speak to those who listen and they judge those who trespass. You are not yet ready to hear their language, but soon you will." Lyra felt a shiver run through her, not from the cold but from the weight of his words. The howl repeated, closer now, and the shadows beyond the window seemed to twist as if something immense was moving beneath the snow. She pressed the pup closer, feeling the tiny heart beat rapidly against her chest. "You will not face them alone," Raylith said, his gaze sweeping the darkness beyond the fortress walls. "But you must learn, the forest does not forgive hesitation." Lyra's mind raced. What creatures prowled the mountains? Were they wolves, spirits, or something older, darker that even Raylith had not named? Her fear collided with fascination, a dangerous mix that made her pulse quicken. She realized she had entered a world far more complex and dangerous than the frozen wilderness she had survived. That night, as she lay beside the fire with the pup curled against her, Lyra could not sleep. Every creak of the fortress, every whisper of the wind carried warning. And in the silence between breaths, she thought she heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, almost human. She sat up, heart pounding, eyes scanning the shadows. But there was nothing, only the fire's flicker, casting moving shapes on the walls. The pup whimpered again, and she held it tighter, whispering soothing words that did little to calm her own racing heart. Lyra realized then that her exile had not ended. It had only changed form. She was no longer alone in the wilderness, but she was now part of a world governed by power, fear, and ancient secrets. And the Alpha King, for all his protection, remained an enigma she could neither understand nor trust fully. Hook. Outside the fortress, in the swirling snow and shadows, a howl rose again, closer this time, stronger, and filled with an intelligence that made Lyra's blood run cold. The pup stiffened violently, ears flat against its head. Lyra glanced at Raylith, but he stood silently, eyes dark and unreadable, as if he too were waiting for something the night would reveal. The morning light filtered through the high windows of the fortress, dust and frost glittering in the weak rays. Lyra had spent the night awake, listening to the wind and shadows that moved outside. The pup lay curled against her chest, its tiny body warm and alive, grounding her in the strange new world she had entered. Raylith did not appear until the sun rose fully, his tall silhouette framed by the heavy stone archway of her chamber. His presence was silent but commanding, the kind of power that did not need words to remind her that she was in his domain. "Today, you learn," he said simply. "The fortress is not merely stone and walls. It is a living place, and everything in it has a purpose. You must understand its rules if you hope to survive here." Lyra rose, her muscles stiff from the previous day's journey and lack of proper rest. She nodded, curiosity mingling with fear. I will try," she said softly. Raylith's eyes, dark as polished stone, swept over her. "Trying is not enough. You must do, and you must endure." He led her through the inner courtyard, past statues of ancestors whose faces were carved with stern precision. Wolves padded silently along the edges, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim morning light. The pup scampered at their feet, surprisingly bold despite its size, as if it understood the unspoken hierarchy that bound these creatures to the Alpha King. Lyra's heart raced as they moved deeper into the fortress. The corridors twisted and spiraled like veins in a living body. Every door, every shadowed arch seemed to pulse with history and memory. Whispers of the past, of battles fought and won, seemed to echo faintly in the stones. "You must understand one thing," Raylith said, his voice low and firm. "This place is not a home for the weak or the fearful. It demands loyalty, courage, and strength. Those who falter here do not remain long." Lyra swallowed hard. The words were meant to intimidate, but she felt a strange thrill, a spark of determination she had not known she possessed. She had survived exile, storms, hunger, and isolation. She would survive this too. Their steps brought them to a training hall, a vast space lined with weapons and shields, the air heavy with the scent of steel and leather. Here Raylith began her lessons, not just in combat, but in observation, strategy, and the careful reading of behavior. Every gesture, every glance, every movement mattered. "You must see beyond what is visible," he instructed, tossing her a small dagger. "Not every threat is obvious. Not every ally is loyal. And never underestimate the power of knowledge." Lyra caught the dagger, its weight unfamiliar in her hand. She studied him, his movements precise, controlled. A predator's grace combined with a king's authority. The thought struck her. This was a man who could command the loyalty of wolves and men alike, who could rule with a glance or a whisper. And yet, there was a loneliness beneath it all, a shadow that even his strength could not chase away. As days passed, Lyra adapted. She learned the fortress's hidden passages, the behavior of the wolves, and the strict rules that governed every action. She trained relentlessly, guided by Raylith's sharp eyes and exacting standards. Yet every lesson, every challenge carried an undercurrent of tension between them, a pull of power and desire, respect and fear, curiosity and caution. She also began to understand more about the pup. It was not merely a companion. It was a creature bound to the Alpha King's line, a symbol of legacy and loyalty. Watching it grow stronger, more confident, Lyra realized that her care for it had awakened a protective instinct within herself, an instinct that Raylith seemed to notice, though he never commented directly. One evening, as snow fell softly against the fortress windows, a shadow moved through the halls. Lyra sensed it before she saw it, the subtle shift in the air, the faint whisper of movement against stone. She drew her dagger, heart racing, and crept forward. The pup followed, ears perked, body tense. A figure stepped from the shadows, a man cloaked in dark leather, his face hidden beneath a hood. Lyra's pulse quickened. She recognized the insignia of a rebel faction, a group that had long sought to undermine Raylath's authority. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice steady, despite the fear knotting her stomach. "Leave now or face the consequences." The figure laughed softly, a sound that made the hairs on her neck rise. "And who will stop me? You, a girl with a pup?" Lyra's grip on the dagger tightened. She knew she could not face him alone, yet she could not flee either. The lessons Raylath had taught her, the awareness he had instilled, surged through her. She circled carefully, watching his movements, searching for an opening. Before the man could react, Raylath appeared, stepping from the shadows as silent and deadly as a wolf. His presence alone was enough to command attention. The rebel froze, eyes wide, understanding too late that he had underestimated the Alpha King's reach. "You will leave," Raylath said, his voice calm but deadly, "or you will not leave at all." The rebel hesitated, then lunged with a dagger. Raylath moved with impossible speed, disarming him with a single motion and sending him sprawling to the floor. Lyra watched, awe and fear intertwined, as Raylath stood over the man, an unstoppable force contained only by the precision of his control. The rebel fled, disappearing into the night, leaving Lyra and the pup alone with Raylath in the quiet of the hall. She turned to him, eyes wide. He could have killed me." Raylath's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "And yet you did not fall. That is why you are here." He stepped closer, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You have courage and wisdom. Both are rare. Both are necessary." Lyra's heart pounded. The intensity in his gaze, the power he radiated, was overwhelming. She realized that this man, this Alpha King, had the ability to see her strength, her fear, her determination, and perhaps even the parts of herself she had tried to hide. Days passed, and Lyra began to sense a growing bond, though unspoken, between herself and Raylath. He tested her with increasingly difficult challenges, forcing her to confront not only the dangers of the fortress but also the fears within herself. Each encounter pushed her limits, and each time she discovered a deeper reservoir of resilience. Yet the world outside the fortress was not still. Whispers of rebellion, of treachery, drifted like shadows across the walls. Lyra realized that her presence, her connection to the pup, and her growing influence in the fortress made her a target, not only for enemies but for forces she could not yet understand. One evening, as the fire crackled in her chamber, Lyra sat with the pup nestled against her. She thought about the exile, the mountains, the Alpha King, and the strange, unyielding pull she felt toward him. Despite his fearsome reputation, despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of her place in this world, she felt a connection that defied reason. The pup stirred, whining softly, and Lyra looked toward the window. Shadows moved again, subtle and deliberate beyond the fortress walls. A chill ran down her spine. The mountains, the wolves, the rebels, they were all pieces of a larger puzzle she had yet to see. And she sensed that the trials ahead would demand more than courage or strength. They would demand loyalty, sacrifice, and perhaps even the surrender of a heart she was only beginning to trust. Raylath appeared in the doorway, silent as ever, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "You have done well," he said quietly. "But there is more to learn, and more to survive." Lyra met his gaze, feeling the weight of unspoken truths between them. The fortress was a place of power, danger, and legacy, and she was no longer an outsider. She was part of something larger, something ancient and alive, and the Alpha King, for all his mystery and fear, had placed her within it, whether for protection, for test, or for reasons she could not yet understand. Hook. As night deepened, a howl echoed through the fortress walls, low, deliberate, and filled with intelligence. The pup stiffened violently in her arms. Lyra's heart raced. She turned to Raylath, but he stood silently, expression unreadable. Then from the shadows beyond the courtyard, a massive shape moved, its eyes gleaming like molten gold. And Lyra realized, with a surge of both fear and awe, that the wilderness was coming for them, and nothing would be as it had been before. The snow lay thick across the mountains, blanketing the fortress in silence. Lyra stood at the edge of the inner courtyard, the cold biting at her cheeks, yet the warmth of the fire she had carried inside seemed distant now. nothing compared to the unease twisting in her chest. The pup pressed close, shivering despite her efforts to keep it warm. She had begun to notice more of the fortress's hidden rhythms, the quiet patrols of the wolves, the way the walls seemed to hum with unspoken energy, and the subtle shifts in Raylith's moods that she had not understood before. Every glance, every gesture he made carried weight and meaning beyond words. He had been her guide, her protector, and yet the distance between them remained, like a wall of stone she did not know how to breach. It was during one of these mornings, as frost clung to the windows and the fortress corridors were empty, that Lyra discovered a hidden chamber. Its door was almost invisible, carved seamlessly into the stone, and she had found it by noticing a faint draft where there should have been none. Her curiosity, always a spark she could not suppress, urged her forward. Inside, the room was small but filled with relics, scrolls, weapons, and a single chest carved from dark wood. She approached cautiously, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her. On a table lay a small collection of documents faded with age, detailing the lineages of the Alpha King and his predecessors. Her fingers trembled as she read, and a sharp breath escaped her lips. Her own name appeared there, Lyra of the Eldrin line, a family thought lost centuries ago. A lineage of warriors and sorcerers once powerful, now scattered and forgotten. The realization hit her like a cold wind. She was not simply an exile. She was a survivor of a bloodline that had once opposed the very ancestors of the Alpha King. The implications were staggering. Could Raylith know? Could he trust her, or would he see her as a threat? The fortress suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating, as if the walls themselves were judging her. She held the pup tighter, grounding herself in the warmth of life she still protected. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion in the courtyard. She rushed to the window, her heart lurching as she saw figures moving under the cover of darkness. Rebels, clever and dangerous, slipping through shadows with a purpose she could not yet grasp. The pup growled softly, sensing the threat, and Lyra's pulse quickened. Without hesitation, she grabbed her dagger and slipped out through a side passage she had memorized, following the rebels' trail. She moved silently, her body tense, senses alert. The lessons Raylith had taught her, watching, listening, predicting, flared to life. She could anticipate the rebels' movements, slipping through the snow like a shadow herself. The rebel leader was clever, using the frozen ridges and hidden paths to his advantage, but Lyra's determination and instinct allowed her to keep pace. And then she saw him, the pup, lifted roughly by one of the rebels, its tiny body squirming in fear. Rage and desperation surged through her. "You will not take him," she shouted, rushing forward, her dagger raised. The rebels froze, startled by her sudden appearance, and the pup's whines grew frantic. Lyra's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the fierce need to protect what was hers, and what had come to symbolize her own courage. A struggle ensued, quick and tense, every movement precise. Lyra dodged, struck, and parried with the skill she had begun to cultivate under Raylith's instruction. The rebels had expected an easy target, but they underestimated her resolve. Just as the leader lunged forward, Raylith appeared, stepping from the shadows like a force of nature. His presence alone was enough to make the rebels hesitate, and then fear took hold. He moved with controlled, deadly precision, disarming and disabling them without a single wasted motion. Lyra watched, awe and relief mingling in her chest, as the man who was both her captor and protector handled the danger with effortless strength. The rebels fled into the night, leaving Lyra and the pup safe once more. She dropped to her knees, clutching the small creature, and felt a wave of relief that was almost overwhelming. Raylith approached, silent but not impassive, his gaze holding hers. "You are reckless," he said, voice low and measured, "but not without skill." Lyra looked up, meeting his eyes. "I had to save him. I couldn't let them take him." Raylith's expression softened slightly. "And yet you did more than survive. You protected, you endured, and you acted with purpose. That is why you remain here." She felt a strange warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of pride, fear, and something more she did not yet name. The Alpha King, for all his distance and power, had recognized her courage and strength, and in that recognition she felt herself being drawn into a bond that was both terrifying and compelling. Days passed, and Lyra began to see Raylith differently. The fearsome ruler was not merely a man of strength and authority. He was a man burdened with responsibility and loneliness, a man who had been shaped by centuries of legacy and power. In quiet moments, when the fortress was still and the wolves slept, she glimpsed a vulnerability behind his stoic facade, a hesitation, a quiet sorrow that he shared with no one. It was during one such evening, as the snow fell softly and the firelight flickered across the chamber walls, that Lyra dared to speak. "Raelith, why do you protect me? You barely know me, and yet you watch over me like I matter." He paused, looking into the flames, his shadow stretching across the walls. "Because," he said finally, "you remind me of what it means to feel, to care, to hope. I have known power and isolation, and yet in protecting you, I see the possibility of something more, something I thought lost to me long ago." Lyra's heart beat faster. She had never heard him speak like this, never seen the walls of command and fear shift to reveal a glimpse of the man beneath. She realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that her presence in his life was changing him, and unknowingly changing her as well. But the fortress and the mountains were not still. Shadows lingered, whispers carried through the halls, and the threat of rebellion was never far. Lyra knew that the safety she felt was fragile, dependent on both her courage and Raelith's power. And deep in her bones she sensed that the next trial would demand more than skill or strength. It would demand trust, loyalty, and perhaps the surrender of the heart she was only beginning to understand. One night, the pup whimpered suddenly, ears flat against its head. Lyra turned toward the sound, and through the window she saw movement, large, deliberate shapes moving among the fortress walls. Her heart raced as she realized that the rebels were not acting alone. Something else had come with them, drawn by the same cunning, intelligence, and hunger that had stalked the mountains since her exile. She rushed to Raelith, gripping his arm. "They're back," she whispered. "And something else is with them." Raelith's expression hardened, his dark eyes narrowing. "So it begins," he said quietly. "They think they can challenge me, but they do not understand the power they are up against. You must be ready." Lyra's hands shook, not from cold but from the weight of realization. She was no longer merely a survivor of exile. She was part of a world of power, danger, and legacy, one that demanded courage, wisdom, and sacrifice. And the bond she felt with Raelith, complex and unspoken, would be tested like never before. Hook. Outside the fortress, the shadows moved closer, larger, and more intelligent than anything she had faced. The pup growled, bristling, and Lyra felt a surge of both fear and determination. She glanced at Raelith, whose dark eyes reflected the firelight and the threat beyond. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. And Lyra realized that the coming night would change everything she thought she knew about survival, loyalty, and love. The wind howled across the fortress walls, carrying with it the scent of danger. Lyra stood at the edge of the inner courtyard, the pup pressed close to her chest, ears flat, trembling against her warmth. The shadows she had sensed days before had grown bolder, moving with purpose, a silent intelligence that chilled her blood. Raelith appeared beside her, towering and silent, the Alpha King in every sense. His presence alone seemed to command the mountains themselves, yet even he did not speak immediately. Instead he surveyed the horizon, eyes narrowed as if reading the intentions of the unseen threat. "They are close," he said finally, voice low, steady, "and they bring more than rebellion. They bring malice, cunning, and greed. You must be ready, Lyra." Lyra's hands tightened around the pup. "I am," she whispered, though her heart raced. The lessons he had taught her, the training, the awareness, had all led to this moment. Yet standing on the precipice of danger, she felt the weight of fear pressing down, heavier than the snow on the mountains. Raelith's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Fear is not weakness," he said. "It is proof that you are alive. Use it. Let it sharpen your senses, not dull them." The first shadows moved into view, a wave of figures, rebels armed with weapons, flanked by massive creatures she had never seen before. Their eyes gleamed in the dark, intelligent and cruel, reflecting the firelight from the fortress. Lyra's pulse raced, but she did not flinch. She had survived storms, exile, betrayal, and the mountains themselves. She would survive this. Raelith stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "We face them together," he said. "But you must trust yourself, and me." The words, simple yet commanding, ignited something inside her. Trust, courage, The knowledge that she was no longer alone, not in the wilderness, not in the fortress, not in this fight. She took a deep breath, feeling the pup squirm slightly in her arms, and nodded. The battle began with a howl, low and resonant, echoing through the mountains. Wolves emerged from the shadows, moving with precision and grace, their loyalty to Raelith unquestionable. Lyra followed his lead, moving with calculated steps, positioning herself to defend the pup while also aiding in the defense of the fortress. The rebels attacked with cunning, striking at weak points, attempting to flank them, but Raelith's command was flawless. Every motion, every strategy had been rehearsed and perfected over centuries. Lyra found herself moving with him instinctively, a part of the rhythm of his power. The pup let out a fierce bark, joining the chorus of defiance, and Lyra realized that even the smallest life could carry courage in its heart. A rebel lunged toward the pup, and without hesitation Lyra stepped forward, dagger raised. Her movements were precise, fueled by adrenaline and resolve. The rebel stumbled, caught off guard by her determination. Raelith moved instantly, intercepting another threat with his own unmatched skill. Together they became an unstoppable force, the synergy between them growing with every strike, every maneuver. Hours seemed to pass in moments. Snow and shadow blurred around them, the clash of steel, the howl of wolves, and the crackle of fire combining into a symphony of chaos. Lyra's muscles ached. Her breath came in ragged gasps, yet she pressed on, driven by the need to protect what she loved, the pup, the fortress, and now, the man who had claimed her as part of his world. Finally, the tide of attackers faltered. Raelith's presence, his control over the wolves, and Lyra's unexpected skill turned the battle in their favor. One by one, the rebels retreated, disappearing into the snow and night, leaving the fortress standing, the walls unbroken, and the Alpha King victorious. Lyra sank to her knees, the pup clinging to her, shivering but alive. She looked up at Raelith, who approached slowly, his dark eyes scanning the courtyard for lingering threats, and then he stopped before her, his gaze softening in a way she had never seen. "You survived," he said, his voice carrying both awe and approval. "Not just the battle, but the trials, the fear, the choices. You are more than I expected. You are ready." Lyra's chest swelled, pride and relief mingling with exhaustion. She realized that in the midst of danger, in the heart of the fortress, she had discovered a strength she did not know she possessed. She had faced exile, betrayal, and shadow, and she had endured. Raelith crouched slightly, reaching for the pup, who barked softly and nuzzled his hand. "And you protected this life," he said, eyes meeting hers. "That is the truest courage of all." The wind shifted, carrying with it a strange silence, as if the mountains themselves had paused to witness what had transpired. Lyra felt the weight of the moment, the enormity of the trials she had faced, and the bond that had formed between herself and the Alpha King. Raelith stood slowly, his shadow long against the snow. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and commanding, yet filled with an emotion she could not name. "You belong here. Not just within these walls, not just in this fortress, but here, with me." Lyra's heart skipped. She had expected command, authority, judgment, but not this. Not the unspoken claim in his eyes, the recognition of her courage, and the silent promise that he would no longer let her face the world alone. I belong?" she whispered, doubt and wonder mingling. "Yes," Raelith said firmly, yet gently. "You were cast out once, left to face the world alone. But that ends now. The mountains, the fortress, the pup, and we claim you, not as a prisoner, not as a subject, but as someone who has earned her place through courage, loyalty, and strength." The words resonated in her heart, bringing tears she had not realized were waiting. She had survived abandonment, exile, and fear, and in doing so, had found a place, a purpose, and a connection that transcended the cold and darkness she had once known. Raelith extended his hand, a gesture of claim and trust intertwined. "Come," he said. "Your trials are not over, but your place in this world, in mine, is secure. Together, we face what comes next." Lyra placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and steadiness of him, the unspoken promise of protection and partnership. She looked down at the pup, who nuzzled her hand, and realized that survival, courage, and love were intertwined in ways she had never imagined. The mountains no longer seemed so cold, the snow no longer so hostile. She had faced exile, shadow, and rebellion, and emerged stronger, braver, and more alive than ever. And now, with the Alpha King at her side, she understood that she was no longer merely surviving. She was living, and she had claimed her place in a world of power, danger, and legacy. The wolves gathered around them, loyal and watchful, their eyes reflecting the firelight and the promise of new beginnings. Lyra felt the weight of history, the presence of the fortress and the pull of destiny all at once. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what the mountains, the shadows or the trials ahead held, she would face them with courage, with the pup, and with Raylith, the Alpha King, by her side, hook and resolution. The snow settled, calm and quiet as dawn broke over the fortress. Lyra held the pup standing beside Raylith, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. They had faced exile, shadows, and rebellion, and emerged victorious. The Alpha King had claimed her not as a prize, but as a partner, a survivor, and a soul brave enough to endure the darkness and emerge into the light. And as the mountains whispered around them, Lyra felt for the first time in her life that she was truly home.